Good evening. If we could gather around for just a few minutes. I know there are lots of temptations around the room, including good chat, good food, good drink, good friends. But my name is Fitzhugh Mullan. I had the good fortune to be among the founders of the NCCS 30 years ago, roughly this month. And we are in part celebrating that this evening. And it is, as we say in the Cancer Survivorship movement, it's a pleasure to be here, meaning it really is awfully good to be here. I can say that personally. I can say that for many of us in the room, and I can say that for NCCS as a whole. It is really a pleasure to be here. What I want to do is tell you just a little bit about those early years, and we have a picture which should arrive on the screen at some point of the founders. There we go. This is the fall of 1986. The place is Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'd had the good fortune to find stability after a pretty nasty go with cancer in the mid-70s, mediastinal seminoma with lots of complications, and had written a book about it and then an article in the New England Journal called The Seasons of Survival in 1985. It was published. And that article described this phenomenon that seemed to me the most real of survivorship. It wasn't death and it wasn't life as we'd known it, but it was something in between, and particularly during what I call the acute phase, that is after diagnosis and with the initial medical treatment, your life was enormously disrupted, but thereafter it wasn't necessarily tranquil, and things had changed, and there was an intermediate phase of going home and struggling with were you sick or not, and how did you follow up, and how about health insurance, and how about employment, and so forth. And then if one was fortunate enough to have that kind of settle down, one had long-term survival, because life was changed. Health insurance was still an issue then, as it is less so now, but issues of changed physique, a lost breast, in my case, lost ability to be as athletic as I had been, secondary tumors, a variety of family disruptions, it remained with you, and good too. You were stronger and different. But the point was this survivorship thing, this phenomenon that started at the point of diagnosis, was more or less with us for the rest of our lives, those of us who were diagnosed. And that is many of us in this room, many of us in this country and this world. So in that article I said flippantly, we ought to have an alumni association. A young woman named Kathy Logan, who'd had a cancer herself, was running a survivorship group, not by that name, it was called Living Through Cancer in Albuquerque, called me and said, great article, we should do it. And I said, do what? And she said, start the Alumni Association. I said, no, you're kidding. I got a day job, you got a day job. Anyway, she persisted. I'd had the good fortune of going around the country on the book that I'd written, which is called Vital Signs, a young doctor's struggle with cancer, and met many people in the cancer movement, not dubbed the survivorship movement. And with a couple of Rolodexes and a lot of phone calls, we assembled these 21 people that weekend. And after the electricity of coming together, sharing our experiences, sharing our passion, and our vision for a survivorship place, we formed the NCCS and went forth to make it part of the public discourse in America and the treatment experience for as many patients or survivors as possible. 30 years later, we're still at it, and the world has changed. I want to acknowledge in that photo folks who are with us tonight, Barbara Hoffman in particular, but one's known to many of you, Kathy Logan, Susie Lay, and Patty Gantz from UCLA, an oncologist who was part of our first team. Michael Lerner, well known to many, and the late Harold Benjamin as well. And then people who have been key players over the years, who weren't at that meeting but have meant so much to NCCS. And first among those, of course, is Ellen Stovall, who took over the reins of the organization in the early 1990s when we moved from Albuquerque to Washington and held those reins tightly up into the very recent period. And unfortunately, her passing early this year. But our salute and our affection, our salute to the work she's done and our affection to her is without bounds, really. She is the one who carried the NCCS forward and gave it the national and even global presence that it has today. Others who have been key to that include Sam Turner, Elizabeth Goss, Betsy Clark, who's with us tonight, who was a president for a period, Nina Wendling, and others. One hesitates to name anybody for forgetting others, but Julia Rowland, who has run the Office of Survivorship Research at the NCI since its inception. And of course today, Shelley Full-Nasso, who's our Executive Director, Sandy Weldon, the Chair of the Board, and Barbara Hoffman, who is there and is still on the board, at least until today. She definitely gets the Nobel Prize for longevity and stick-to-itiveness. Thank you, Barbara, our lawyer in perpetuity. Survivorship really has prospered. It is understood and spoken of, I think, throughout the treatment sector of this country. Patients refer to themselves now as survivor. The word has always gotten a bit of pushback. Some consider it the property of the Holocaust, others consider it negative. I consider it positive. I think many of us do. It is life, it is a certain kind of life, and it is valuable. And it is definitely reflective of an important phase of modern life, and certainly for all of us who've had cancer, it's precious. We have the Office of Cancer Survivorship at the NCI, Survivorship Research, as I've mentioned, the Cancer Policy Roundtable since the year 2000. We have the 2005 IOM, now National Academy of Medicine report, From Cancer Patient to Cancer Survivor, Lost in Transition, a very important piece of the policy discussion around cancer. And the idea emanating from that, cancer survivorship plans, which are with us, not to the extent we'd like, not in every cancer treatment center and institution, but out there in play in many places. Going forward, just a quick look at the future, clearly the continued progress in not only treatment but prevention of cancer is important to us as survivors. We stand as witness to the perils and the predation of cancer. We salute the progress that's been made and that those illnesses that have been prevented. Vigilance, I think many of us think is important in several respects. One, an area that's much better than it was, but that's attention to the long-term effects of treatment, which are getting better, more precise, more personalized, more confined. But secondary and late effects of cancer have been a significant issue for those of us fortunate to be survivors, but they need pursued research, continued research, and investment. And also vigilant efforts to cultivate the voice of the cancer patient, to discern the voice of the cancer patient. Again, an organization such as NCCS has existed in a changing policy environment. I think it's fair to say we were inspired by the early AIDS activists who were in the field already in 1986, showing how you could speak up for your illness. And I think effectively we spoke up, perhaps not as shrilly and perhaps not quite as effectively, but it is that same spirit of the empowered patient who brings the wisdom and the politics of the experience of having had cancer to public attention. But there are strong interests, important interests, and even commercial interests active in the same space. And how does a patient organization remain true to the patient voice and keep that foremost in mind as they go forward? That was and remains a challenge to all of us as participants in a civil, patient-oriented, patient-centered movement. Again, a challenge, particularly in days of short funds, but something I think we keep in mind. And finally, the mega issues of our society are important to the survivorship community. Universal coverage, which we're inching closer to, but still aren't there. Among those without insurance and those without coverage, cancer strikes every bit as often and perhaps more. And the problems for those individuals and families are Herculean. Health equity and attention to the disparities in care in general and cancer care in particular are part of what a health system in a country whose arc is bending towards justice, we like to think would improve with time, and we hope the cancer survivorship movement is in the forefront of those who argue for and help a society achieve better equity and fuller coverage. So it's been 30 good years. We expect 300 more. If cancer's around that long, we expect it to be beaten down by then. But certainly, we've made great progress in these 30 years, and for the survivors and the survivorship movement of the country And for those 21 who met these 30 years ago, I salute you and bring you greetings. Thank you.